I think that I had pretty ignorantly thought that I had reached the sport at a time where I would never lose a buddy.
Right.
I genuinely thought that.
Right on. Well, thanks for coming in, man.
Of course, man.
Thanks for making the drive all the way up just for this.
Hey, I'm glad we made it. We've been talking about it for like a year now, so
Yeah.
I'm glad it finally worked out.
Yeah. You'll be back up for Mosport?
I'll be back up the week of Mosport.
Okay.
The race itself is Iowa IndyCar, so I've got to do my TV duties, but I think I'll be here through Friday.
Right.
Yeah.
You must be doing a shitload of flying.
Dude, last year I did 120 flights. I counted for the first time in my life, and as 120 planes. And it's funny when you think about the fact that we spend the whole month of May in Indy, which is where I live.
Right.
I drive to Detroit, Gateway, Nashville, and I think I drove to Road America. So that's like taking out 5 races and still managed to do between IndyCar stuff and F1 stuff and sponsor stuff and just life stuff. It was insane. A lot of air miles.
That's like every other day in an airport.
Crazy. Well, so it's 120 flights, right? Because the thing about Indy is it's not a hub.
Right,
so
right.
Any one trip is 4 planes, right? Because it's 2 there and 2 back, right? So even if it's a one-day trip, it's technically 4 planes. So I may be, you know, I'm fluffing up the numbers a little bit, but like I sat on 120 different planes.
Man, oh man.
Yeah.
Do you have designs to lessen that?
I really did. Around December of last year, I was like, I'm going to do way less than that in 24. And I can tell you basically where I'm at everywhere until mid-December for the rest of the year. And it's a lot. I did not go down. I added IMSA races that I'm now driving in. I've added more F1 races. So yeah, no, I'm screwed.
That's good.
But one day.
Yeah. We'll get back to the F1 stuff. With everyone, I want to start, where'd you grow up? What did your dad do for a living? How did you get introduced to motorsports?
So yeah, I grew up, I was born and raised in Markham. My dad was English, came over to Canada in the 70s and like just a big car guy, right? Just a big racing guy. Formula One, IndyCar, didn't matter. He loved it all. And so that was just kind of my influence growing up. I had this like atypical Canadian upbringing because like my dad didn't care about hockey at all. I didn't really understand hockey until I was in school and everyone else is talking about and playing this sport. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, but did you guys watch a race on Sunday or, Yeah. So it was, Dad and I just, really bonded over motorsports. My earliest memories are like watching F1 races Sunday mornings and then like doing homework and then IndyCar races Sunday afternoons and the race in Toronto, the Molson Indy back in the day. Right. That was like Christmas in July for me, like running around, chasing Mario Andretti for an autograph, stuff like that. And then for my 9th, so the kind of joke in the family is Dad had a midlife crisis, as you do, and bought a vintage British sports car and went racing in Verac, which is where it's mostly comprised of expat Brits, midlife crises, and buy British vintage sports cars and go racing. And so I was 8 at the time, and I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever, going with my dad to the racetrack. He had his first car was a Triumph TR4, absolute bucket of bolts. It was terrible, it was awful, but like Dad was a race car driver. It was the coolest thing ever. And so we met a guy there, was named Bob Mason. His son Andrew raced go-karts. And I had been to like, family cartways and like done the concession cart thing, but I didn't realize that like go-kart racing was a thing. And so he invited us out to like the track one day, Bob and Andrew, and, maybe try his kart out. Well, Andrew was like 5 years older than I was, and I was like 4'8", and he was already like 6 foot. So that didn't work out. But I kind of was introduced to the world of karting. And so for my 9th birthday, I got a go-kart, and that's kind of how it started. Dad was in kind of the fuels business. So he was kind of like a middleman, right? He would buy gas off of, your Esso, your Exxons, your Suncors, Petro-Canada, whatever, and then he would kind of sell it to the mom and pop shops that have 1 or 2, gas stations in Northern Ontario or whatever. Right. So it was kind of like a fuel broker almost, had a couple of service stations himself. And so was in the car business, car adjacent, so it kind of worked out. Right.
Where'd you start, Goodwood?
Goodwood, yeah. Toronto Car Club, baby.
So he bought you a cart?
Bought me a cart.
You guys just showed up?
Yeah, so it was Ashley Tawes. I don't know if you remember that name, but she was kind of a big deal because she was like the token girl that was racing karts in TKC at the time. Cool to see that that's changed a bit now, but at the time that was really just the one. And so it was an old go-kart of hers, and we bought it. And Lon Herder, who was running Goodwood at the time,
right?
I'll never forget, man. We like went in, and I sat in this cart in his like little showroom thing there. And he's like, "How old are you?" I was like, "Oh, I'm 9." He goes, "You're a bit late."
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I'm like,
as
what?
Lon would say.
Yeah. Like I'm already over the hill at 9,
yeah.
right? It's like, oh, okay, I guess whatever. And so we bought this cart off the Taz and showed up to they had like a rookie orientation day, right? And so they have a couple established guys running around on track with all these new people, and it's just like teaching you how to get past and bumping you a little bit and all this stuff or whatever. And I'll never forget Aaron DeHughes was one of the guys, and him and I like had a full-on crash because I didn't see him coming or something and turned it on him. And I'm like, oh man, I shouldn't be doing this. I'm in way over my head. But that was it. And then showed up to the first race and off you go.
When did you start winning races, or when did it kind of hook you?
Well, so I mean, it hooked me right away, but I was terrible.
Okay.
I was so bad when I started. And I was so bad to the point where like midway through the season, Dad was like, we were driving home from Goodwood one day, I'd finished last again. And he was just like, just so you know, like if this isn't fun anymore, we can like, don't worry, like we'll sell the stuff. It's not a big deal. And I'm like, no, I love it. I got to figure it out.
Right.
And every race I would get a little better and I would finish last by less. And then I remember the first race where I didn't get lapped. I'm like, I'm moving in the right direction. It's just taking a little bit of time. I wasn't like that natural phenom that was just plopped in a cart.
Well, and I guess you weren't starting with everyone. Everyone else had been running for 2 years at least.
For sure.
Yeah.
Like at the time, like Marco DeLeo was the hot shit kid in novice TKC go-karting, right? But he was in a go-kart from 5 years old, like 4 times a week.
Right.
So then year 2, go to the first race, which was in Peterborough.
Okay.
And was running 3rd legitimately. And on the last lap, first and second crash, and I won the race. So, like, it would have been my first podium legitimately, but, like, I ended up getting my first win kind of by fluke. But then it kind of started. Like, then every year I got better. Yeah. And I enjoyed it more. And as the karts got faster, I seemed to do better. And so it just was like this kind of good trend as we were moving up.
Right. And then... So, like, when I started go-karting, I'd get an Inside Karting magazine, and you'd be, like, on the cover or something in a first kart. When did it get to that level?
Yeah, so the truth is, like, when I first started racing karts, it was never really with aspirations of doing it professionally, because even at 9 years old, I'm like, that's not a real job. Like, nobody actually gets to do that.
Right.
This is a fun hobby. Like, a lot of kids play hockey, not ever thinking they're going to play in the NHL, right?
Sure.
So this was, Dad did his vintage races one weekend, and I'd go be his pit crew, and then we'd go do my go-kart races the next weekend. He was my pit crew, and this was just kind of the thing. Yeah. But like I said, every kind of year we moved up, I seemed to do a little better and was more competitive or whatever. And then Tony Ventresca, who was running First Kart North America at the time, when I was, I guess, 13, kind of approached us one day. He's like, hey, man, have you ever thought about kind of doing, like, pro karting, like the proper... He goes, well, I think you should look at it because I think you think you've got what it takes. So for the following year, when I was 14, I moved up to shifter and started doing like the proper, like I left Ontario for the first time to go racing, right? And that, correct me if I'm wrong, that's the heyday of American shifter kart racing. Big time. Yeah. Big time. Like I used to be at Goodwood for the Canada Day Cup or Canada Cup, whatever, on Canada Day weekend. And that was the only time we'd ever have shifters come and race at Goodwood. Yeah. Because it wasn't part of like TKC or anything. And I would watch those guys like come up over the hill in the long track configuration. You're like, these guys are nuts. Like they're actually out of their minds. No human being should be doing this. This is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Yeah. And then Tony's like, you want to do it? I was like, well, yeah, obviously I want to do it. Like, come on. So absolute heyday. 125 was, pre-ICC. So it's all still moto. 125 was huge. And I was an 80 shifter at that time. And that was a massive class. And did all like SCUSA and Stars of Tomorrow and did that for 2 years, and it was awesome, man. Learned so much, and like now I'm traveling doing this stuff, and now you're racing against kids who have committed their lives from the age of 5 to trying to be a professional. Right. I kind of really didn't flip that switch until I was 14, because again, it was just a hobby, really. Right. And you go run with those guys and you compete with them, so you're like, okay, let's see how this goes. Right. Right. So you got to the level where
you're now competing with those guys who are the best. And then what, you go to 125?
I did. So I did kind of a weird transition year where, so I did 14 and 15. I ran 80 shifter or 80 junior. And then in 2003, I did a partial 125 season. And then I did the Bridgestone Racing Academy series.
Right.
So that was like also kind of the prime of that, because the SRF KC, the Sunoco Ron Fellows Karting Championship, had this thing where they, like, champions of certain classes got to go do the Bridgestone series the following year, right? And I had done, like, I'm trying to remember, I had done like a race the year before. Brett Goodman, who used to run it, let me do a race like before I was legally allowed to do a race. And so I was 15, I think, and I ended up winning. It was like the 3 races on a weekend, and I won the 3rd race, right? And so he's like, you should definitely do this next year or whatever. So anyway, so moved and did it that next year, but we kind of had to split between karting, and we couldn't do it everything. So decided to do a little bit of a mixed bag there. So only actually did a handful of 125 races.
So then at that point, is that kind of no questions asked, or are you going to your dad saying, hey, we should really do this? And he's going, oh, it's a lot of money to go do this.
I was very lucky that Dad was a racing guy, right? Like he wanted it. Yeah, for sure. But it was never, I will always say this, right? My dad was like the #1 supporter, but he was the least like karting dad, or hockey dad, or, you know, pick your sport. Every sport's got the same, or it's parent now. I mean, moms are crazy too. But like for example, I don't think I ever saw my dad, whether he did it or not, I don't know, but I never saw him like standing at the fence with a stopwatch. I never saw him like, he never once yelled at me for being second.
Not over the wall going like this.
No, he was not that guy. He very much, even though like, was it what he wanted? 1,000%. But he was never going to make me one of those kids that was only there because my dad wanted me to be a race car driver. Right. You know what I mean? And like, I remember being 12 years old and seeing that at the kart track. And it was sad, man. Like kids just getting berated by their dad. And it's like, that kid doesn't want to be here. That kid wants to be home playing like video games. You can see it on his face. That was never me. Dad gave me the option to leave whenever I wanted. I was like, no, you. And then after a certain point, like, you know, he knew I was in, but he was so good in that sense. Like he didn't push in that negative way at all. Right.
So now you're on a trajectory. What's the impetus for like taking that next step? Like, are you conceptualizing it like, okay, there's a path here, I'm just going to go see how far I can go?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Yes, we figured, all right, let's see how far we can go. There was absolutely no path. And there was no plan. Okay. So when I did that first Bridgestone race and I won that race, because like, as you know, karting is one thing and cars are a different thing. And there are sometimes drivers that are just like unstoppable in a go-kart, and something just, that magic doesn't translate when you get into a car, and vice versa. There's some kids that are 5th to 10th place kids in a kart, but something in a race car just clicks, right? And I was always super nervous about that transition. So when I did that first Bridgestone race and I won that race, that was the first time I had confidence in myself to be like, okay, I think we can make a transition here to cars, and like, this is now what I definitely want to do this. Up to that point, I'm like, I don't know, man, like I'm okay in a kart, like I can compete here, like whatever. That's, you know, it's like this scary other world. But that kind of gave me the confidence to be like, no, I really want to try this now. And so my dad and I kind of sat down and were like, look, this is still a 1 in a million thing. Like 99% chance this isn't going anywhere, but like, let's just ride this wave until we can't anymore. We never, like, I had a goal, like I wanted to be an IndyCar driver, but it was never like a crazy, it wasn't like my life was going to end if that goal wasn't reached. I was going to do everything I could to get there, but I understood the challenges. Even at that age, I knew how hard it was to do and like how much of a long shot it was. And so at that time though, there was no like now there's the road to Indy, right? There's a very clear path where you go. That didn't exist back then. It was like, what championship do we race in? Like every year it was this big question of, well, where's the big, like best competition going to be? What are the options? How much money can we find? So there was a lot of things that were sort of dictating where we went. But like, if that's the ladder now, my path was like this, you know, it took me a long time to get there.
See, I always thought of it as, okay, there was this path where it's, you know, just because I saw guys doing it, it was Formula BMW, Mazda, wherever, Atlantic, IndyCar.
Right. And that's pretty much what I did.
Right.
But it wasn't the defined path necessarily. And like guys would skip steps, and, you know, then there was still the split and open wheel. So while you had Atlantic, you also had Indy Lights, you know? And so it was, there was the 2-liter series when Formula BMW came around, like F2000 was still, Formula 1600 was still a lot bigger back then as well. So it's kind of like, where do you start? Right. And I had actually signed a deal, like done a deal with AIM Autosport to run 1600s in 2004. So I did the Bridgestone School in 03, and we were like, all right, let's go race Ontario Canadian Formula Ford, because a great championship. Like Paul came out of there, Greg came out of there, like really, really good championship. And Ian Willis or Keith Willis, the Willis brothers, like one day in the fall kind of wrote me an email or something, and they were like, hey, so there's this new series that's coming to North America. It's called Formula BMW. And I'd heard about it because like I subscribed to Autosport magazine when I was a kid, even though it showed up like 3 weeks late here. Yeah. And I would read it covered. Like I knew everything that was happening in the racing world because of Autosport magazine. And so, you know, they had the German championship, they had the UK championship, they had the Asian championship, and they were starting North America. So he was like, they're doing this shootout. They're going to take applications from young drivers as long as you've been karting and like don't have much racing, like car racing experience. You can submit an application, and if you get selected, they're only picking 24 kids. If you get selected, they're going to fly you out to Valencia, to the F1 track, and you do 3 days of a shootout, and they're going to give 6 kids a scholarship to do the series. He's like, you're not going to win it. You might not even get selected, but you should apply, because if you get selected, at least it's 3 days in a car during the off season, because it's happening in like January or something. So like, sure, go through the thing, write my little, here's why I think I should be, you know. And we got selected as one of the 24 kids from all, it was really the Americas, because a couple of South American kids as well. And so this is like the coolest thing ever, right? And I think this is like peak life, like
for sure,
career. Like this is as good as it gets. I'm racing an open wheel car on a Formula One track in Europe. This is so cool, right? And ended up getting one of the scholarships, which we weren't expecting. So now we're sitting there like, well, I know we've agreed to do this, but like we have like a good chunk of the budget now to do this. So AIM was like, I guess we're starting a Formula BMW team. Wow. And so that's how AIM got into Formula BMW. So we kind of abandoned our 1600 plans and got a little bit more sponsorship to cover the rest, and had someone buy us a car, and we went BMW racing.
So now you're running with, I guess, the best guys in North America at your age level, really. Yeah. There weren't any really older guys, right? In Formula BMW, it was all young guys?
Yeah, for the most part. Like the guy that won the championship was a couple years older than I am, and he'd been running over in Europe. He'd been running in the German championship. But yeah, for the most part, it was guys my age, plus or minus 2 years.
Right. How'd you do in that?
We finished second overall, rookie of the year. They said the guy that won it had been running it the year before in Germany. But yeah, so pretty good effort. We were pretty happy with that. And that's kind of what made us feel like we were justified to move up. Right. And so at the time, you know, it was Star Mazda. And again, AIM was like, well, I guess let's go Star Mazda racing. And so started a Star Mazda team. Wow. And Mark Wilkins was my teammate. Right. And yeah, went up to the next level and tried to see what we had there. Right.
And then how did that go? And was it a big jump?
So that jump, I feel like even though it wasn't designed this way, even back then, the jumps were all very commonsensical, right? They were pretty natural. Every car was 25% better at everything. Okay. 25% more power, 25% more downforce, 25% better braking, whatever. So yeah, the transition of the cars wasn't too different. The big thing with the Mazda was it was a bias ply tire. And so it took me a second to figure out where, like, the BMW was it was a nice low profile Michelin rate. Like, it was a very specific kind of way to get the tire to work. Yeah. The bias ply you could lean on a lot harder and like slide a lot more and, like, frankly have a lot more fun with. Yeah. But it took me a second to figure that out. So one guy won like the first 5 races of that championship. I was the first guy to beat him. It was Rafa Matos. I was the first guy to beat him. And then he never won another race, and everyone else kind of, because he had run the year before, everyone else kind of started figuring it out. But once I figured out how to make the tire work, we had a great second half of the year, won 3 races, I think, and went into the championship finale 3rd in points with a shot still at the title. first and second had to finish worse than 8th, and I had to win. So it was a long shot.
Yep.
Qualified on pole, won the race. They finished 7th and 8th. Those bastards. So it was so close to a really good year, but it was still a strong, still a strong campaign.
Right. And at that point, like during those years, are you getting any outside recognition from above? Guys calling you and saying, "Hey, what are you doing next year?"
Until that was kind of the first year that happened. So that was 2005. But it's interesting because, and I've had this conversation a couple times, and like Dario Franchitti was the guy that said it to me the kind of clearest. He was like, you were born in the worst possible decade to be an open wheel driver in North America.
Yeah.
Because my first year in cars was 04 properly, and tobacco stopped in 03.
Right.
Right. So also the entire industry is now like, how do we find sponsors? Right. We haven't had to do it for 20 years.
Right.
We just called up cigarette company XYZ and said, I need $50 million. They're like, cool. How about 55? Like they were giving money away back then.
Right.
So that overnight it was all gone. And even though they all knew it was coming, nobody knew what they were doing to actually go find a sponsor. So you had that kind of battle, which meant that the top was kind of weak. So then obviously it doesn't filter down the same way, right? And then, so this is now going into 06. We're only 2 years away from the world falling apart and nobody having any money in 2008, right? So like I could not have timed my career any worse. And I was still pretty lucky, so I'm not complaining. But so yeah, at the end of 06, I got a call from a guy that was going to be the team manager of end of 05, the new Forsyth Atlantic program.
Okay.
So for 2006, Atlantic was coming out with a brand new car. And for the first time ever, they had this championship prize of $1 million to go up to Champ Car for the champion.
Right.
This had never been done in racing before. Right.
Wow. That's a huge deal.
Huge. And so like now on the road to Indy, it happens at every level, right? They saw like, oh, this makes sense. This works. Your success is actually rewarded. Here you go.
Right.
But at the time, this was like completely revolutionary stuff. So we started this season with something like 25, 30 cars or something in Atlantic, which was insane.
Yeah.
So like we got called about this, not a small budget. We ended up finding a company that was willing to pay for the entire thing, which was insane.
That's huge.
Unheard of. And I was in school at the time. I was going to school at McMaster.
Okay.
Because education was always very important to my parents, right? It wasn't like I wasn't one of these kids that like homeschooled in high school just to like always be at the track. They're like, no, you're probably not going to make it. So you should probably have a fallback plan.
What were you taking?
Commerce and economics. Okay. It was a joke. Like I hated every minute of it. Yeah. And I was so happy to get out of there. And, so when this call came from Forsyth and then we started doing the work, we found this guy that was willing to pay for it. I was like, okay, look guys, to my parents, I'm like, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. I'm now one step away from Champ Car, from the top, with a team that's known for, fostering Canadian talent specifically.
Yep.
I cannot focus on school and do a good job there and focus on my career and do a good job there. Like I have to do 100% of one or the other. So we have to make this call now. And they're like, well, yeah, you can't turn down this chance. School will always be there. So I went to my school because they're like, go figure something out with the school. So I go to my school and I explain the situation. They're like, yeah, no problem. We'll give you a 5-year deferral. Come back anytime in the next 5 years, just pick up where you left off. And I was like, sweet. I'm like, 19 years old, I'm like, 5 years. What do you know?
Yeah.
I'll be out here, I'll be making money in 2. I'll make Champ Car in 2 years. So yeah, I dropped out of school and then focused full time on racing kind of for the first time.
Yeah, that's a big jump, I think, for a lot of people going from racing to focusing full time on racing. Did you have anyone mentoring you along at that point, saying, hey, you got to watch this. Hey, really look at I don't know if you can look at brake traces at that point, but whatever it is.
Not in that sense so much. The one kind of mentor that I had was a guy called Jim Bowie, who was the first person to really explain to me the business of racing. And at the time, the like case study on it was Ryan Hunter-Reay, which was funny because, I was just a kid. He was already in Champ Car because he's very, very old, much, much older than I am. And Ryan was like the up-and-coming American superstar, was winning in Atlantic and Indy Lights, and like whatever he was in, he was winning, and he was tanned, blonde-haired Florida kid. He was like Captain America, right?
Right.
But he came up right before, I want to say his first year in a champ car was like maybe 02 or 03. So it was right when the bottom fell out of all the tobacco money.
Right.
And he found himself basically without a ride. I forget the specifics, but he was unsellable. He was in whatever. And this Jim Bowie guy who I met because he was actually the series manager of Formula BMW.
Okay.
So I met him through that, and we kind of stayed in touch, and then we started working together. And he was the one that explained to me, he's like, you have to be a good driver, but that is only a very small part of the program now. Money is required to go racing, and you have to be a spokesperson, essentially, for any company that's going to be giving you a 6 or 7 figure check to go racing. So you've got to be relevant and separate and differentiate yourself off track, because there's a lot of good people on track. There's a lot of good drivers.
Right.
You've got to be both if you want to be successful. He was the first guy to explain that to me. And he used Ryan as an example. Not that Ryan isn't marketable, but like he just wasn't focusing any energy at that time on that side of it.
Right.
Because on paper, he should have been the most sellable. He should have been he should have been in a car easily.
Right.
So as far as the mentorship side, Jim was kind of huge on that element of it. From the on-track side, I worked with a mental coach for a bunch of years, kind of through that time as well, which was a huge help. Could not endorse that enough for young drivers out there. If you're not working with someone like that, it's worth looking into because it's such a mental game.
Right.
I mean, and there's no, like, I don't know why there's ever been a stigma attached to that. Like any sport, any athlete, right? You've got coaches for specific movements, right? Like why is it just because it's your brain, who cares, right?
Right. No, for sure. And like it's so mental, and someone asked me to explain it or whatever. I'm like, okay, it's like golf with no brakes.
Right.
Like no brakes.
Yeah.
Like you drive up, swing again, and it's got to be perfect.
Yeah, it's like every step you take, you're swinging again. Imagine you're just constantly swinging the golf club. It never stops moving.
Exactly.
And you have to just keep, No, it is. You don't have the chance to, it's more like tennis, right? Like tennis is a lot more, once you're in it, like you're reacting, it's always moving, right? But even then, you point, you have a break, catch your breath, serve, keep going. You just don't have that freedom in a race car.
What was the biggest takeaway or the biggest, like, I don't know if there was a quantum leap or not with the mental coach?
It's funny, man. There's a lot of really cool things that came out of that I used for my entire career, and I just use in everyday life. Like it really changed my outlook on a lot of things. The biggest one is understanding that there are things outside of your control. And there's no point wasting any time or energy on those things. So our kind of mantra was, you can't control what you can't control. And once you identify those things and you just like stop giving them any stock and wasting any time on them, it's amazing how much more capacity you free up to focus on what you actually have some influence over.
Right.
So that was a really, really big one. And just trying to keep emotion in check, right? Like he would, one of my some of my homework, right? Like one of the exercises that I had to do was if I'm like just driving on the road and somebody cuts you off or whatever, you can't honk, you can't give them the finger, you can't let your heart rate get up. You have to immediately forget that it happened and just completely ignore that because you can't control it. It's already happened.
Right.
There's nothing you can do about it now.
Right.
So what does getting mad do? It slows you down. That's all it really does.
Right.
And so it was in daily life, I started training myself to like disassociate and like compartmentalize emotion, and those were huge tools behind the wheel.
Right. So did you ever, like racing can be so devastating. Did that help you from that point on, or were you was it tough to lose before that?
I think it's always tough to lose, right?
Yeah.
Like that's it, but
but as a kid, it can be really tough to lose.
Yeah. I think it helped less with that and was more helped with if I made a mistake, right? Because again, you can only control what you can control. So if I had a race where the car broke, I'd be upset, but I wouldn't really care.
Right.
If I had a race where somebody took me out, I'd be like, you're an idiot, but like, I don't really care.
Right.
If I had a race where I made a mistake and it was like, it was bad. I hate, like, you just get down on yourself so hard, you know what it's like in that situation. There's nothing you hate more than being the reason for a wreck or or losing a race or whatever. And so it kind of helped me, like, I would let myself, you could have your pity party for a couple hours or a day if you want, but it was then the ability to be like, okay, that's done. I can't affect that. Can't change that. So we're not even going to spend any energy on that anymore.
Right. So how'd the Atlantic season go?
Atlantic season was tough. That was a big jump.
Yeah, big jump for the car, right?
Big jump for the car, big jump for like the infrastructure. You know, now you're working with multiple engineers. Data is a lot more a part of it. The aero of the car is quite a bit higher, understanding vehicle dynamics a little bit better. And then just the racecraft, like that series, by then you're racing against some guys that are quite a bit older,
right?
Have more experience and more things, stuff like that. And so I won a race, couple podiums. I think we finished like 10th in the championship. So we didn't go into that year expecting to fight for a title. It was always like, in theory, a 2-year program.
Right.
But that was a tough year. It was tougher to get the results than I was expecting. And one of my teammates ran fairly well. He finished like top 3 in the championship. And so again, you're always your yardstick, right? Because it was a new car, so you never knew what team was going to figure it out first or whatever. We did not, but still my teammate was doing a better job, and that was really hard to swallow.
Right. Right. So it was a 2-year deal. Did that sponsor or partner come back for the next year?
No. And so I ended up having to switch teams because we couldn't afford to stay at that team, and got offered a really good deal from a team called Sierra, which, what's funny, so the teammate I had at Forsyth that ran really well was Andreas Worth, who's the guy that beat me in the Atlantic Championship. And then the next year I went with Sierra, and their other driver was Rafa Matos, who's the guy that won the Star Mazda Championship that year. So I'm like surrounded by these guys. I'm like, God, I know I can beat you guys. It's really annoying. And that year was even harder. The results were way better. The car, I had figured out a lot more. I had grown a lot as a driver, but Rafa was unbelievably fast. And he dominated the series, destroyed me, and absolutely dominated the series. And it was the toughest part about it was, well, losing is the toughest part. But, you know, his engineer came up to me afterwards, because Rafa is an incredible driver. I think at that stage of his career, because he still races in Trans Am, really kills it, right?
Yep.
I think at that stage of his career, he still struggled to understand the car a little bit and set up and things like that. And so his engineer came up to me at the banquet. His engineer was a famously prickly guy who I subsequently worked with. Awesome guy when he's on your car, but very tough to deal with when he's not. And he shook my hand. He was like, "Thank you." And I was like, "Okay, what for?" And he goes, "Well, if it wasn't for you setting up the cars, there's no way we would have won this championship." And for some reason, that pissed me off so much, man.
Yeah,
I was so angry when he said it, but I'm just like, but no, he buried me. It was a very good, humbling kind of lesson to have.
Yeah.
We came close in a couple races. I got burned by that stupid no blocking rule that the Champ Car system had for a while, where like you couldn't even defend.
You couldn't make one move?
No. So like I'd be leading on a restart with 4 laps to go, and into the first, whoever's leading is just hosed. Right. So like dumb stuff like that. So it was just a really frustrating year in that sense.
Right.
But, you know, a good character builder.
So were you, you know, now you've done your 2-year deal, and the logical next step is IndyCar. Where are you sitting over the winter, or where are you, you know,
well,
with the business and everything?
So now we're at the end of 2007, and we didn't have money for Champ Car, and I didn't have a good enough. I mean, nobody was getting paid rides at that time, right?
Right.
Like,
what was there, 2-3 guys?
Yeah.
Handful?
So Rafa won the championship that year, and he ended up actually taking the prize money very controversially over to Indy Lights.
Oh.
So I guess there was never like a stipulation that it had to be spent in Champ Car, but like it wasn't even the guy that dominated the series that had $1 million in his pocket couldn't make a deal work. So we actually transitioned over to Indy Lights, because that is also, remember, 07 was the last year of Champ Car.
Right.
So the writing was kind of on the wall. And I'll openly admit that like my dad and I, because we didn't know anybody, like we were doing this on our own, right? Like we don't have any advisors that knew really like the industry well or whatever. So we kind of doubled down on the Champ Car and Atlantic side of things.
Right.
And ended up getting another deal in Atlantic, because at least I had a bit of a reputation there and I could get a bit of a deal. And then, you know, early in the calendar year of 2008, Champ Car folds and series merge, and now I'm running Atlantic without a who are we running with?
Right.
The whole season got flipped upside down. They had to redo the whole schedule. They tacked us on to Grand Am, and like it was a bit of a mess. It was a bit of a wasted year in a way.
Sure.
Because nobody was watching. Nobody cared anymore.
Right.
Because now Indy Lights is the only one that mattered, because that was the one that was at the IndyCar tracks and whatever. So that was kind of the lost year. We had a decent year, but it didn't matter.
Right.
It's completely irrelevant.
Right.
And so for 09, then we had to just do like the really lateral move and go over to lights and kind of start from scratch, because I had no reputation over there. I'd never raced on an oval. And so it was a bit of a shot, you know, but here's what it is.
Yeah, that's what I'm always curious with so many IndyCar guys, and everyone seems to give me a similar answer. Like, yeah, I jump into ovals for the first time, wasn't a big deal. You know, was it?
Yeah, it's terrifying.
That's what I thought.
Terrifying. Because I grew up hating them.
Sure.
Because I'm just being blatantly honest here. When Greg died, I was like, ovals are dumb.
Right.
Greg Moore was my hero, and I thought he was the best driver. And if he could die doing that, then these are dumb. This is dumb.
Yeah.
Which is obviously a very immature approach to this scenario.
Well, I felt that way over my life.
Right. Yeah. So I didn't like them. I had no interest in them. And then, you know, I'd even follow along. Like, I'll never forget, there was a race at Iowa, 2000 oh no, let's backtrack. 2004, I want to say, Indy 500, Bruno Junqueira got hit by a lapped car, ends up going to the wall forwards, breaks his back. In my opinion, never came back the same driver.
Right.
I'm like, that was dumb. Wasn't even his fault. Ovals are stupid. The guy broke his back for no reason. Basically ended his career. It didn't really, but this is how I was dramatizing it in my head, right?
Yeah.
2000, I want to say it was 2007 or 8 or something like that. Iowa Speedway. Tony Kanaan's leading the race by a mile, and the car just steps out on him and he crashes. I'm like, see, look, he didn't even do anything different than he did the last 100 laps. Ovals are dumb. And this was just what I had told myself, right? Yep. And then I'm like, you know, planting my flag on the Atlantic side, and it didn't work out. So
right.
Like, hey, ovals, go team. Yeah. And the first year in lights, I really struggled with them. I struggled with understanding how they worked, how to make the car fast, the racecraft. But I had a really good teammate named Wade Cunningham, who had been in lights for a couple years already, won the championship already, and was especially good on the ovals. And he was a really big tool for me, and I learned an awful lot from him about oval racing. And by the end of the year, I kind of felt a little more comfortable. And then, you know, I ended up leaving that team and going to so I was with Sam Schmidt Motorsports my first year, which was like the powerhouse. They'd won the last however many championships and won a million races and all this stuff. But it wasn't, something over there didn't click well, and we decided not to go back there. But we were struggling to find something. So there was this small team called Team Moore. I think they'd only ever won one race in their whole history. But I kind of was talking to the team manager there, the team owner, and I was like, well, if you let me pick my engineer and you let me pick my mechanics, let's try to make this work. Right. And there was a Canadian guy who was a partner in the team, so he threw some money in to kind of make it all work. And I chose my engineer and I chose my mechanics, and we built this little team. And we went out and at the time, it was the closest championship battle in lights history. We lost it by like essentially one place. But, you know, won a bunch of races, and that was the year that oval racing really clicked for me. And, you know, won races on ovals and just really started to enjoy them, not just understand them, but like actually really love doing it.
Right. Right. Yeah. I always say it's a different sport.
It's a completely different skill set. Yeah. It's, you know, the car's got 4 wheels and an engine, but like other than that, nothing is the same. And you have to, the big thing on an oval is all of the inputs you get from the car are so small. Right? If you're in a road course and you have a big oversteer on exit, you're like, yeah, okay, this is very obvious because I'm sideways, right? The oval, understeer, oversteer, you know, the way the car moves vertically, like any of the vehicle dynamics, the inputs are so tiny. So you got to kind of recalibrate all of your senses to feel the smallest little differences, things that you literally wouldn't think twice about on a road course. Right. That's a game-changing issue on an oval. Right. And so once you do it enough and you get those reps in, you start like it's the first time Indy Lights, 1.5 mile oval, they were like, it was just dumb flat. Like you just, like this is stupid. Oh, what's the car doing? I don't know. It's turning left. Like, what do you want me to tell you?
Right.
I'm flat out and then nothing. Oh, go tighter. Okay, I'm tighter. It's just like, I couldn't tell how much scrub was in the car. I couldn't tell how much track distance I was using. I had no idea what I was doing. So you get those experiences and you learn that stuff. And then the challenge of it is awesome.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. So now you're the guy or the second place guy. What does the off season look like? You're still, obviously the goal is IndyCar.
Yeah.
You know, you're sitting down with your dad saying, how are we going to make this happen?
Yeah. This is where it gets interesting. So we get a phone call from Brian Lyles of Newman Haas, the team manager at Newman Haas. I'm like, hey, man, we watched you all year. Great job in lights. We'd like to talk to you about 2011. Sweet. So we go in for a meeting. I don't remember if we did the test first or the meeting first. I think we did the meeting first. Went in for a meeting, and it was very intimidating, right? Because like up to this point in your racing career, deciding on a team is just like, I have this much money. What does it cost? You know, and like, and you figure it out. But now you're like getting it. Now it's like an interview, and I've never done that before. Right. I was sitting with this guy and then Craig Hampson, who I've watched just kill everyone in Champ Car with Sebastian Bourdais for the last half a decade, basically. Right. And they're just peppering me with questions, and they know everything about me. They know everything that happened in lights. They've really done their homework, and like it was really intimidating. But like, okay, well, we've signed Royal Servia. We want a rookie as his teammate. We want to kind of this veteran rookie balance. You're one of two guys we're looking at, and so we went through this whole process. And he's like, all right, let's go do a test. Cool. So we go do a 2-day test down in Sebring. So, first time in an Indy car, and like I literally think until Dad took this picture of me pulling out of the pits, like my first run, like first lap ever in an Indy car, right? I'm pretty sure it was the background on his cell phone until the day he died. Like it was just the coolest moment for us to like. For sure. It was so awesome, and the test went really well. By the end of the second day, I actually like last run of the day. New tires, like, all right, let's get, you get your 450 run, right, which is just how it works. You get one set of new tires at the end. You've had your whole day to tune the car, work on this, work on that, whatever. Go for it. And I ended up being a 10th quicker than Oriole. And so in my mind, I'm like, well, that's it. Job done.
Yeah, I'm like, number one driver now.
There's nothing. Well, no, I just want to be employed, right? Like, I wasn't worried about status at that point. My status was employed or unemployed. That's the one thing I cared about. But you're like, all the things that I can control, right? I did my job, right? I did what I had to do to earn this test, right? I made enough of a statement in lights that they took notice and they gave me a test, and I did this test and I did what they asked me to do. And at the end of the day, I was actually faster than the other guy, which is the only person you can be measured against. And I was like, everything in my control worked. Right. And it was like a really kind of satisfying moment. I was like, okay, I think we're good. Yeah. And so the team calls me up like a week later, like, hey, man, really impressed with the test. We'd like to offer you the ride. One caveat, we don't have any sponsors for this car yet. But it was the classic chicken and egg situation, of course, right? Well, I can't go to a sponsor and tell them what driver we have until we sign a driver, but I can't sign a driver until we have a sponsor, blah, 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 right? And I was like, no, you can sign me. I have no other options. This is fine. I will be the chicken or the egg or whichever one I am. No problem. Right. So I signed this contract because I'm like, this is Newman Haas. Yeah. They're going to 7-time champion. Like, of course they're going to find a sponsor. Like it's December. We got plenty of time. Right. And so I signed the deal, and there's literally a date by which money has to be in the bank to make the first race in St. Pete. Right. Do you know how much they were short? All of it. Okay. Okay. Every dollar. They had $0. So I mean, we didn't like the first 2 weeks. I think my dad and I kind of sat back and were like, sweet, like cool. And then after 2 weeks, we weren't like flooded with phone calls from the team being like, oh my God, we have all this money now. We're like, maybe we should help. Let's call a couple people that we've worked with in the past, or like sponsors that we've tried to pitch, because you know how hard it is to pitch junior categories, right? So sure. Going to any company with like, hey, sponsor my Indy Lights program is very tough. Yeah. So we're calling some bigger companies and whatever. And really long story short, whatever that date was to have money in the bank by St. Pete, that day came and that day went, and we had $0. And I went into this like unbelievable state of depression, being like,
yeah,
we worked so hard for the last, whatever it was, 10 years basically, to get to this point. We got the opportunity. We executed on the things that we could control, and it still didn't happen. So I kind of, it goes back to that, like, 14-year-old me being like, having that conversation with my dad, being like, yeah, we'll give it a shot, but, it might not work out. Right. And I went to St. Pete with my team polo, and I stood on pit wall and watched everybody else race around. And I had this moment. I was like, so this is it. Like, I've had a good run. It's been fun. I got to do some cool stuff. Like, I got to, I did A1GP during that whole time. Got to travel around the world as a race car driver or whatever. But, like, this is probably it, because I don't know what else I can do. There's nothing else in my control that I can influence at this point. And I let myself be, like, sad and stupid about that for, like, 24 hours. I'm like, no, we've come too far. This cannot be the way this ends.
Right.
And it was actually the Saturday night of the St. Pete weekend. We got a call from one of the companies we've been talking to saying, all right, I get it. We're in. Can we get a car on track? We're like, well, not for tomorrow, but yeah, for the next race. And so I made my first start 2 weeks later.
Wow. What was the company?
So it was Sprott Asset Management. And the story behind that is insane, because we were getting close to that original drop dead date to make St. Pete, and we had no money.
Right.
And my dad was at his local pub drinking with his buddy.
Yep.
Lamenting the fact that we couldn't. He's telling the story. He's like, I can't believe we've got this close and there's nothing.
Right.
And this guy, he goes, well, I went to university with this guy who's ended up doing really well for himself in business. He's supported Canadian athletes like Olympians and stuff in the past. Maybe I can connect you to? My dad was like, I will literally talk to anybody. Yeah. Yes, absolutely connect us. So we connected with Eric Sprott. And Eric kind of looked at it, and he was like, from a company standpoint, I'm struggling a little bit. But we had also pitched one of these programs that a lot of drivers end up doing, which is like, I'll sell future earnings, a percentage of future earnings, right?
Yeah,
so like buy stock in James Hinchcliffe kind of thing. And he was like, that I understand, right? That's a simple business transaction, right? Sure. It's a simple investment, and it either works or it doesn't, but I understand that. And he's been very supportive of Canadian athletes. Like when the Olympics were in Vancouver, he donated like all the gold for the medals and stuff like that. Like, he's incredible philanthropist and really supports Canadians. And so, yeah, he basically agreed to do that kind of a deal. And so, yeah, we put the company on the side of the car, but it really was more of a personal deal.
Right. Was he going to recoup 100% of his money plus some?
It was X percentage for Y number of years.
Okay.
So who knows?
Right.
Right. It was a gamble.
Yeah.
But the caveat was he only cared through the Toronto race.
Okay.
So he was willing to fund enough money to do the Toronto race so that he could do a big hospitality thing and host whatever, which was actually helping us, because what he was trying to do is he was like, well, look, let's go racing, and then you have until Toronto to actually get the company to understand why this is a good idea. Okay. And then corporately we'll maybe sponsor in the future. Okay. Very, very fair deal. So yeah, so 2 weeks after the start of the season, we ended up making our IndyCar debut, which was funny because remember when I said I went to my school and asked for a deferral and it was 5 years? Well, April 2011 was 4 years and 9 months into my 5 years. September, I was going back to school if I didn't have a job.
Wow. Oh.
We were that close.
So that was the last piece you could control.
Pretty much.
Right.
Pretty much.
Right. So you start the second race of the season, and that's got to be another... Well, I mean, you've already proven yourself that you're quick, but that's still got to be a big jump. Like, now you're in with all these guys who... you've watched on TV, and did you roll up like, yeah, I'm going to be fast, or holy shit? No,
the complete imposter syndrome, right? Yeah. You're like, I don't belong here. And then my first race, I qualified 8th, and Dario Franchitti qualified 7th. And Dario and I he'd kind of been a bit of a mentor to me we had a mutual sponsor when I was in lights and he was in IndyCar. And so we did a lot of events together. We got to know each other a bit, and he was always kind of really good with advice and stuff. So he was like a hero of mine. And I'm on my first grid, you know, doing the anthem and all this stuff. And they're like, all right, clear everybody off. And like, I felt like I should be leaving with all the fans, because that's what I've been doing for the last 2 years as a lights driver. I would go walk up and down the grid. And then when they blew the whistle, I would, you know, take off. And I'm sitting there, I'm looking at my car, and I'm looking at Dario Franchitti's number 10 Target Chip Ganassi racing car beside me. I'm like, this is nuts, man. Like, what is happening right now? And yeah, it took a minute actually, because it was another Dario story. So the following week was Long Beach, and we're walking back from the pit lane to the paddock, and I run into Dario, and he's like, how you doing? How you finding everything? I was like, man, it's weird. It's tough. Like, I don't feel like I should be here. Like, this is you, and this is Scott Dixon, and this is Will Power and Ryan Hunter-Reay. I'm like, this is insane. And he puts his arm around me and he goes, Hinchy, my boy, you're going to learn something real quick. You spend all this time trying to get to this place, idolizing the people that are here. And then when you get here, you realize it's the same jackasses you've been racing against since karting. It doesn't matter. They're just people. And for some reason, it just like clicked, and I stopped looking at them like Scott Dixon or like Will Power. It's just like, yeah, that's the 9 car, that's the 12 car, just a car.
Right.
And it really helped. It really, really helped me kind of feel like I should be there. And then I ended up having my first top 5 that weekend. Right. And so it all just kind of started snowballing in the right way.
So that top 5, that had to be leaving that weekend, like, okay, I belong here.
Yeah, it really did, because the Barber race, our first race, was tough. I mean, I literally never practiced fuel saving.
Right.
I had like 600 kilometers of testing before the first race. Like, it's insane. And so, and the race, I got taken out halfway through. I spun on the first lap. We recovered to like 10th. Things were actually going pretty well. And I got taken out by somebody. So like, it wasn't a great race overall. So then the Long Beach race went a lot better. I burned my car down in practice. The gearbox caught on fire and literally torched the thing. So I was in Oriole's backup car with like my wings. The thing looked like it was put together on Tuesday. Right. But we finished top 5 and like just a really strong race, and like took care of tires, saved fuel, did what we had, like restarts on cold tires at the end of the race. Like all these things that could have really messed it up and didn't. We pulled off a 4th place finish, and that was like, yeah, okay, now this is starting to feel good.
Right. Right. And like, you'll obviously know better than I will, but it's not like, okay, we've got half the season funded. If I can be top 5 all the way through, the season's paid for in prize money.
No.
Not at all.
No, that's not exactly how prize money works in IndyCar, unfortunately. Yeah, it's not like the cup model where you can just like start and park and make money, right? It's, yeah, prize money is a little bit different. It's very heavily weighted towards Indy 500 and like very, very thinly dispersed outside of that. Right. So if I'd won Indy, yeah, our season was set. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But no, we figured now we had the runway to July. Right. To go find a sponsor. Yep. And now the car was actually on track, so it was just even hopefully that much easier to sell, and the results were good, so that much easier to sell. Nothing. Right. Do it.
And who's doing that? You and your dad?
That's the team now. Like at this point, the team really took over, and they were kind of putting in the work, and they had a ton of meetings, they had a ton of ideas, but just none of them came together. And so, you know, originally there was a race in Brazil that it's kind of hard to explain, but it costs extra. Sure. Like it was a bit above and beyond. If you start the season, in those days and kind of today, if you start the season and commit to the full championship, the series gives you a certain amount of money. Got it. It's like a start money. Yeah. Yeah. But this race was not counted towards that. So anyone that was going, you kind of had to pay extra, and it was like an extra $200,000 or $250,000 or something. It's not insignificant amount of money. And so we were a couple races into the season, and they're like, hey, this isn't part of our program. We need to find another $250,000 if we want to do this race. So we had to go find that money first. Okay. So we got that. And then, yeah, we're counting down to Toronto. No money. Yeah. And ultimately the decision was made that that the Haas's, that Carl and Bernie Haas were just going to keep the car on track as long as it took to find a sponsor, because we were running well. We were running for the Rookie of the Year championship, all these things. They didn't want to take the car off track.
Right.
So between Eric Sprott and the Haas's, like they are the reason I made it.
Right.
Because without that support that first year, I mean, who knows? Like, who knows what could have happened?
Sure. It's the magic of having the car on the track.
Yeah, it helps a lot. And it's right, it's right place, right time. Even though we were in the wrong time, as we've discussed,
right?
It's still like everything just fell into place.
Right.
It could have gone off the rails at 10 different times.
Always, almost every year, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, 2011, that's the year Dan died.
Yeah, that's right.
Did that have a big effect on you? The kind of that oval mentality again?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it had a big effect on me. It didn't have as big an effect on my feelings towards oval racing as, in hindsight, it probably should have. Or talking about it now, yeah. That was really tough because I knew Dan. He wasn't running full time that year, but he was around. He was doing commentary and he was doing a few races, and I had known him a bit from lights, just hanging out in the paddock or whatever. And he's just such a nice guy, and he was the class clown. He was such a joker and always made everybody feel welcome in a group. And I think that IndyCar lost Paul Dana in 2006. And before that, it was Greg in 99. And I think that I had pretty ignorantly thought that I had reached the sport at a time where I would never lose a buddy.
Right.
I genuinely thought that.
Right.
And because, in the interim, we'd seen, that Kenny Brack had that massive crash at Texas. Ryan Briscoe had that massive crash at Chicago. Like, we'd seen some unbelievably catastrophic shunts that the guys were, for them, injured, but, came back.
Right.
So I just, it never even crossed my mind. And so that was a really big reality check and a really big slap in the face when we lost Dan. And that race was so messed up. Like, everybody had a bad feeling about that day. I'll never forget, so we go up for first practice, and the car was just glued to the track. Like, it was so easy to just drive around in a circle. Right. Flat out. That now, this is almost going back to my first time on an oval in Indy Lights, because I come in, they're like, all right, what do we need? I was like, I don't know what to tell you. There's no scrub. There's no balance. We're just too stuck. But the rules where you had to run X amount of wing, and it was just the wrong formula for that track. So you could run so close to the car in front of you. Right. At insane speeds. So it was really, that first practice was really tough, because I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. And, I'm not super comfortable out there, but, there's nothing to change whatever you want. It's not going to affect it. Right. We'll go the exact same speed. And everybody's doing that exact same speed, because we're all just doing the same thing. So at the end of practice, fast forward to the end of the weekend, and I'm back in my hotel room after the race, and my roommate at the time sent me a text, and he was just like, hey, man, just wanted to check in and see how you were doing. I was like, yeah, not great. And then he wrote back, he goes, I'll never forget the text you sent me after practice on Friday or on Thursday or whatever. I was like, what? I scrolled through my phone, and on my phone, he texted me, and he said, hey, man, how was practice? And I said, insane. We're going to kill somebody. And I saw that, and I just burst into tears. And I was like, I didn't even remember saying that. I remember sending that text. But, it was such a bad situation. But once we were in it, it was such a hard thing to change. And, obviously nobody thought that was going to happen, right? But that was just awful, man. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, the difference. I had Al Unser talking to him and asking him, because obviously he started a lot earlier, and I said, using his dad as a mentor, did you guys have that discussion? He's like, yeah, you just don't crash, right? Which is totally different from the era that you're in, where it's like, no, you drive it freaking hard. Yeah, yeah. And it could happen.
Yeah, because it's true, right? I mean, the cars are so safe now that drivers in general are a lot less afraid to crash, because 99 times out of 100, you're fine. Right. A bad day is a concussion.
Yeah.
You know, it's so rare that anything worse than that happens. Obviously, you know, Robbie had worse than that. I had worse than that in 15.
Yeah.
So there was all these indicators that like, yeah, it's still super dangerous, and it's still like, you still got to be smart about it.
Right.
Oval racing is always going to be inherently that level up from a danger standpoint than circuit racing.
Right. So that season ends, and are you back to the drawing board again?
Pretty much. And it's all tied in. So we have a good season. We win Rookie of the Year in the last race. And the team was like, great job. Definitely want you back. Like, exceeded expectations, whatever. I'm like, awesome. Then December 1st or December, oh no, I actually think it was December 5th. I think it was my birthday. I got a phone call saying like, hey man, yeah, Carl and Bernie are done. We're shutting the team down. And it's just like, oh man. Okay, got it. And so by December, like most rides are gone.
Right.
Certainly any paying rides are gone.
Right.
Right. So it's like, okay, so how do we now go back to the drawing board? And like literally a year prior was my test where we were like, yeah, sweet, we're good. And then we couldn't find the money for St. Pete, right? So we're kind of at a loss here. The Sprott thing didn't really work out because, as so often happens in motorsport sponsorship, so we used those first races, 8 or 9 races, whatever it was, to get the company to understand, did some hosting, and they were really getting into it. They're buying into it. And then there was like a change of CMO, like right before or right after maybe the Toronto race. And the new CMO hadn't seen any of the races and was just like, don't get it.
No huge amount of money. Yeah.
Yeah. No interest.
Right.
So that was a huge bummer. And so we were just literally back to cold calling and trying to beg, borrow, and steal money just to put something, even a partial ride, whatever.
Right.
I'd done well enough that like people were at least answering the phone and be like, yeah, we can maybe work out this, whatever. And then one day my phone rang, and it was a guy called JF Thorman, who is Michael Andretti's right-hand man. Like he's the COO or vice president or whatever of Andretti Autosport at the time. And he was like, hey man, it had been documented that the morning of the race in Vegas, Dan had signed a contract to go race for Andretti in the GoDaddy car because Danica was leaving to go to NASCAR.
Right.
So literally the morning of the race, he had signed that deal. And I hadn't even I had heard that story, but like it had totally, you know, and everything that happened, everything just like, I completely forgot that even existed. Like that story, that car, like none of it even was in the conversation for me.
Right.
Nor did I think that my name would have ever been in a conversation to take that car.
Right.
But they called me up and they're like, hey man, it's between you and one other guy. We're interested. You had a great year last year. And, you know, obviously we had to take a minute and figure out what was going to happen post Dan, but this is where we're at. And we want to let you know, can you come in for a meeting, whatever. So did all that. And long story short, they ended up signing with me, and I took over the GoDaddy car for the following year.
So and is that like...
Yeah, that's the first time where it was a little bit, because it's first multi-year contract,
yeah.
Right? So you're not just going year to year, literally for the first time in my life.
Right.
It was paid for. There was a sponsor, a real sponsor. There was a salary, you know. And it was with one of the big three. Like that was Andretti Autosport. It was one of the biggest teams in the series.
Right.
And so that was a big step up. Like Newman Haas had an incredible history, right? And their track record speaks for itself. But it still operated as like a smaller team from kind of a past era, right? It wasn't really a powerhouse at that time.
Right.
But Andretti Autosport was like a modern day powerhouse. So that was a big, big change in culture and environment and everything.
Right. And is that where you wrap your head around, like, I'm a professional driver.
Yeah.
I don't have to find any money.
Yeah.
I'm getting a salary.
And even just like, even your rookie year, you still kind of feel like an outsider, right? And it's still, you know, it sounds dumb, but like your race suit is just like gray with one logo on it, you know? And like you're not one of the guys. Yeah. Like you're a guy, but you're not one of the guys.
Yep.
And so now you're part of a proper program that has like there's no space on your suit. There's just little stickers everywhere or whatever. So it's the whole thing was just a completely different step up.
Right. Right. So you run good in 2012, 2013, where you win the first race of the season.
Yeah, that's right.
So you're there, you're with a good team. we're going to skip a little bit, your crash at Indy. I don't know, you know, it got such publicity at the time, but, you know, half the people just kind of saw a headline, and I don't think a lot of people really understood what happened there.
Yeah, fair. So mechanical failure, right? The right front rocker just snapped mid-corner, which is a very bizarre failure. Like that, I had mechanics, you know, with 20 years of IndyCar experience come up to me after the fact and be like, I've seen guys smoke the wall. I've seen them, I've never seen a rocker fail. And so it failed. I hit the wall, and part of the suspension, rather than crumpling like suspension normally does, especially when it hits a wall at 220 miles an hour, it's almost like if you hold an egg end, it's really strong.
Right.
So it's like I hit it that worst possible angle, and rather than crumpling, it just shot through the car and into me. So it went kind of in around my right butt cheek kind of thing, and came out by my left hip and lodged into the tub. And it hit an artery in my left leg, which was like the real issue.
Right.
I mean, yes, I was impaled, so that was an issue.
Right, but it didn't take out lungs and...
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The bigger issue was that it hit an artery, so I was just bleeding out sitting in the car there.
Were you out right away?
Amazingly, no. But I was so concussed, I don't remember any of it. Sure. Thank God.
Yeah.
But the safety team got there, and I was conscious, but like they could tell I had my bell rung. Like I was not making any sense. They're like, what hurts? And I said my back hurt, I guess. Yeah. I'm like, okay. So they go to try to pick me up out of the car. And they're like, man, he's really heavy. So they think, okay, well, maybe when he hit the wall, like the tub compressed a little bit. So they got the spreaders open out and kind of opened the top of the cockpit. And they heard this pop. And what it was, in hindsight, was the suspension piece kind of coming unglued from the left side of the tub. So then they go to pick me up again. Like they like put their hands under my legs and like under my arms. And then the guy's like, something's wet. And he pulls his hand up and it's red. He's like, so they lift me out of the car, but the suspension piece stays in the car. So they essentially pulled me off of the A-arm. But they don't, because they don't know what's there. Right. So they pick me up, and then they just hear this thud in the seat. And the safety guy, he told me, he's like, I thought my radio came off my belt. So I looked down into the tub, and there's a suspension rod and a pool of blood. And he was like, huh, okay. And that was the first time they kind of put together what had happened. Because they've seen suspension pieces go through tubs before, but it's usually further down, and like TK got one through his calf one year in like Motegi or something. So I think once they saw it, they kind of put it all together. But there was like 3 different holes in me, and they couldn't figure out where the blood was coming from. So it was just like, get him in the ambulance, and we got to get him straight to the hospital.
Jeez. And you're out by that time?
Yeah.
Like blood loss? And yeah. So they stopped the bleeding, and when you...
No, they didn't. That was the problem. So the ambulance doesn't have any blood. And even the infield medical center at Indianapolis, which is a very good mini trauma center, has no blood on hand.
Really?
They do now. Okay. But so they were pumping me full of saline just to keep my blood pressure up. Right. But I was just leaking at an unbelievable rate. So normally, you would fire up the chopper, right? But Indianapolis is the only track where it's actually faster to drive. Okay. Because it was a Monday, it was a practice day, it wasn't like race day or anything. And the hospital, the closest level 1 trauma center is like 5 kilometers down the road on the same street. So by the time you fire up a chopper, load them in, whatever, it's actually not as quick. So they just sent cops ahead, shut the street down, and this ambulance guy got me to the hospital in like 8 minutes, leaking the whole time. They get me to the ER, throw me on the gurney. They put a big gauge needle in each arm, just pumping blood in. Right. And I'm just pumping it right back out. Right. And they cannot figure it out. And so they're like, we got to get to the OR. We got to open them up and figure out what's going on. So they get me in the elevator, and in the elevator up to the OR, they lose my pulse. And so my surgeon said to me that he was like, about 90 seconds more, we probably weren't going to get you back. He just lost too much blood. Because they'd put 22 units of blood through me, and you only hold 11. Right. So I had like 2 full oil changes. That's the joke I like to make about it.
Holy moly.
Yeah. So it was bad. It was bad. But then they got up there and cut me open, found it, and all good.
And stitched you up.
Stitched me up.
What else you break?
Dude, unbelievably, nothing. No broken bones. It was all like tissue damage.
Wow.
But half an inch up or right, and like it shatters my pelvis, and I don't survive.
Right.
Like race again, walk again, I probably don't live.
Right.
And any other racetrack, because of the distance it takes to get to the hospital, no chance I make it.
Wow.
It was for 100 things that had to go wrong for that accident to happen and that injury to happen. 1,000 things had to go right for me to survive it.
Right.
So it's just crazy.
So not a crazy rehab then?
Lengthy.
Okay.
Lengthy. A lot of damage, like a lot of tissue damage. So because of the location, if we want to get technical about it, of a lot of the wounds, right? You can't be going to the bathroom normally through a bunch of open wounds.
Yeah.
So I had to have a colostomy for 3 months.
Okay.
So as everything was healing up, I had a colostomy. Then I'd have another surgery to get that reversed. And so you can only do so much physical activity.
Right.
So that was kind of the limiting factor, right? Is I wasn't allowed to push myself to the point where I needed to start training to get back in a car until I had healed up and then had my second surgery and then healed up from that surgery. So it was 4 months before I got back in a car, which all things considered isn't terrible. But it was kind of right to the end of this. They just missed the end of the season kind of thing.
Right. Was that tough mentally, like the rehab, like sitting around?
It was very tough because my doctor, like day 3 or something, comes in the hospital. And he's like, okay, here's the deal. I know that all you want to do is get back in a race car. I'm like, yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
And he goes, athletes are the worst patients.
Right. Yeah.
Which is very understandable, right? And so he was like, you're going to want to push and you're going to want to do more and you're going to want to all these things. And he goes, that is the worst thing you can do. I need you to do less. I need you to do nothing. Your body just needs to heal, and to do that, you need to do nothing. And it was so hard for me to kind of accept that because it's just so, I mean, you know what it's like. You're just so counterintuitive to like how a driver's wired.
Right.
So how I did it was I looked at that as the challenge. So like I'm going to push myself to do more nothing than anyone's ever done.
Right.
I'm not going to do nothing. I'm going to do more nothing.
Right.
I'm going to push more in this category. So like I was given a pedometer and I was allowed to walk a certain number of steps a day, and every like 3 days it went up by 100 steps or whatever, right? Okay. So I planned my day out. So I would get out of bed and I would walk to the couch and I would lay down. And then I would pick a time of day where I'd get up and I'd walk laps around my couch until I reached whatever that number was with the built-in 13 steps that it took to get to the bathroom. I'd build in 2 more bathroom breaks. Then I knew I had to get back to bed. Well, that's 27 steps. If it was a day where I had to go to hospital to get my bandages changed, well, that was 41 steps down to the car, then like 118 steps to the elevator. Like I had the whole thing mapped out.
Right.
So that way I could go to bed every day on the step that I was allowed to take, but no more.
Right.
And that was the only thing that like kept me sane during it, was like the competition with myself of nailing that number and not going over.
Right.
It was so bizarre.
So how was the team with everything as far as looking into the, I'm sure right away, like you're, all right, what am I doing next year?
For sure. And they were awesome in that sense. I mean, they from day one, they're like, it's your car, don't worry about it. Because that was my first year with that team, right? We had signed a 3-year deal and it was like the 5th race or something. So like, it's your car, do not worry about that. You're the guy, we'll put in whoever we have to until you're back, but no stress there.
Right. And that's with Schmid?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So then that's 2015. And then when does that deal go away?
So that deal ended. So we had 3-year, 15, 16, 17, and then we did another 3-year for 18, 19, 20, but we ended up parting ways at the end of 19, a year short of the deal being done.
Can you talk about that?
It's to a certain extent.
Yeah.
It was from what I understand, instigated by the sponsor. There was something that I was asked to do by the team that wasn't cleared with the sponsor, and the sponsor didn't like it and took action to get me removed from the car. It's a very bizarre situation. I obviously disagreed with their with their take on it.
No kidding.
But at the same time, everything happens for a reason, you know, and I do firmly believe that. And as bummed as I was at the time about how it all transpired, felt a little betrayed and let down by certain people in that whole thing. But at the same time, my time with that team was coming to a close anyway. Like, I could feel that. I wasn't happy there. The results weren't there. It just, there were so many good people on that team, so many people I loved working with, but there was just a few things that just didn't sit right. And as I learned in my lights career, right, when I did 1 year with the powerhouse team and we really struggled,
right,
and then I went to the little team with the people that I wanted around me and we dominated or did very well.
Yeah.
The people combination is so important, and there was just a few people in a few places, like it just didn't click. And so I was already knowing that, you know, originally the end of that deal was going to be the end of my time there.
Yep.
It just got fast tracked for reasons beyond my control, but it actually ended up kind of being a blessing in disguise.
How so?
It just opened up the opportunity to go back to Andretti Autosport,
right,
which was kind of always a goal. Like, I never left that team. I should say the reason I left that team was the sponsor we had at the time at the end of the 2014 season didn't re-up, and they were planning on it, and then it didn't happen. So same kind of thing where they were just so far into the season,
right,
it was impossible to find a new one in time. So it's not that I wanted to leave or that Michael wanted to get rid of me. They were like, we don't have money for you.
Right.
And so as you know, I got another offer, went from Schmidt, and I'll never forget, like, I called Michael up. We kind of like delayed as long as possible because kind of giving them a chance, right? And so I called Michael up one day, and he answered the phone with, "Well, I was really, you know, not excited about this phone call." He knew as soon as the phone rang. He was like, "I wasn't looking forward to this one, but it just is what it is." So we had always talked about working together again at some point, and you know, 2020 obviously ended up being a messed up year for everyone,
right?
And so I did a partial deal with them for 2020. I did a handful of races, but then also the other races I worked for NBC for a little bit,
right,
which was a nice stepping stone. So I did full time with Andretti in 21,
yep,
and then stepped back and did the TV thing.
And was that, you know, all your decision? Like 21, I've done what I need to do. I enjoy, you know, being in the booth.
It was, yeah, it was 90% that.
Okay.
I had reached a point. There's some things that had happened in my personal life. There were some things that, you know, happened professionally where I looked at, as that season was coming to an end, I looked at what my options really were and what the desire to fight, to be what I needed to be competitive, and a little bit of the love had fallen out of it. You know? And so it was no longer worth the effort and the risk. I wasn't getting, racing's a risk reward business, right? When it comes to lap time, when it comes to making a pass, when it comes to your career in general. Right?
Yeah.
And the risk reward equation no longer added up to me.
Got it.
And so I kind of made that decision. Honestly, I hadn't really told anybody or discussed it with anyone, but like when our last race that year was at Long Beach, just the way the schedule worked out, because still COVID, whatever. And as I was walking down the pit lane after the race in Long Beach, like I knew at that moment that I was done with IndyCar. And it was helped out by the fact that NBC had already kind of reached out and said, "Hey man, as soon as you're done, let me know."
Right. And
so I had approached them a little bit earlier and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about this for next year. Just want to know what the options are." And they were just like, "Boom, 3-year contract. If you want it, it's yours." So I that was part of it, you know,
yeah,
knowing that there's a next step kind of thing.
For sure. Because it's such an unbelievable grind. And, you know, at a certain point when you're getting a salary, it's a different deal or whatever. But like, race car drivers in general work so hard to find an ungodly amount of money and then spend it all and, you know, not keep much. And that's the calculus I find for most guys stepping away. For
sure. And it's the effort to maintain the fitness, to keep, you know, the series is so competitive. If you're not willing to give 100% of your day to being a better racing driver, you're not going to beat the Joseph Newgardens and the Alex Palous and the Scott Dixons. It's not going to happen.
Right.
And, you know, the sponsor that we had in 21 had said that they were going to a different series. And so you're kind of like, I was like, do I want to live through this whole scenario again? Like, is it up to me to find it? Is it up to the team to find it? Like, where is this going to net out? And then, you know, the cars have kind of changed a little bit, and they're a little bit less fun to drive with all the weight and everything. Like, they haven't really kept up with the times, in my opinion. So yeah, just the feeling that it gave me driving it just wasn't that feeling anymore. And it's funny, man, like I kind of, you know, I told my wife and I told my family that that's what I had made that decision. And the next morning I woke up, and when I sat up in bed, I physically felt lighter. And it was just like not getting up with this, okay, what do I have to do today to be a better racing driver? And I didn't because it had been my whole life. So I didn't realize how much it really just was on my mind from the moment I sat up in bed every morning. It was like everything I do, I am weighing against, is this good for my racing or bad for my racing?
Right.
Like, how are you willing to balance that out? You know?
Right.
And I woke up, I'm like, is this what I look at my wife, like, is this what it feels like every morning when you wake up?
Yeah.
This is neat.
Yeah.
This is a cool feeling.
Yeah.
You know, and I was so lucky, man. I had 11 years in the sport at the top, and like got to do a lot of stuff, had some success. Like, I have no regrets about that.
Yeah.
Would have loved to have won Toronto, would have loved to have loved Indy, loved to have won Indy, but yeah, I cannot be upset with how it went down.
No, for sure. When did you know that you were going to be, I'll put words in your mouth, a world-class commentator? Like, when did you know that it's like, okay, I've got something here?
I'm still trying to figure out if that's the case, man.
I think so.
Well, I appreciate that. I was really lucky early in my career when I was running Atlantic. I got to do a little bit of broadcasting, kind of like inadvertently, accidentally. Jeremy Shaw did the international feed for the Champ Car races. So there was like the domestic feed, which was Rick Benjamin and Jan Beekes and all the guys that we watched, you know, growing up. But then there was the international feed, which was the same pictures, but it went out to every country outside of North America.
Okay.
So if you were, you know, in the UK, or if you're in Australia, if you're in wherever, that's just the one that IndyCar at the time would blast out to the world. And it was like the redheaded stepchild of the production. Like nobody really, it was like one producer, Jeremy on his own in the booth, and like no people in pit lane. We just got told when they were throwing down to pit lane and had to just shut up and go down to them, right? But so Jeremy would invite people in to just talk to him and hang out for 10 minutes during the race to kind of break it up a little bit.
Right.
And I got to know him a little bit just from being around the track, and he invited me up to do that a couple times throughout the years. So one year after a race in Houston in Atlantic, he was like, hey, do you want to come up to the booth for a little bit of the Champ Car race? I said, yeah, sure. He goes, why don't you come for the start? Cool. So I finished the Atlantic race, change, run up to the booth, and I throw on the headset, and the producer says, all right, we're live to 170 countries, don't swear, which is
10-4.
The first thing that goes through your head is a four-letter word, right?
Yeah.
And so did the beginning of the show with him. And at like the first commercial break, he took his headset off and he was like, do you want to stay for another one? I said, yeah, I'll stay for another segment. So headset back on, and next part of the race, whatever. Next commercial break comes, and he takes his headset off. He looks at me, he goes, do you want to stay for the rest of the race? I was like, I'm going to watch the race anyway, so yeah, might as well watch it here. Let's put the headset back on and just go. And then at the end of the race, he takes his headset off and he goes, what are you doing next week? And so for the rest of the season, I would do the Atlantic race, and I'd run back to the trailer, change, and I'd run up to the booth, and I would do the international broadcasts with Jeremy. And so it was just, for me, it was just two dudes talking about racing. Like it wasn't, and I'm glad I didn't really appreciate how many people were watching at the time, because like we were in this small little porta pack with like 1.5 screens. Like it was a really budget program, but it was awesome working alongside him because he's such a pro, and it just gave me a chance to just like talk and learn how to talk and how to explain things. And so he would, you know, in commercial breaks, be like, talk about this, or like lean into this, or do this. And it just kind of gave me my first kind of taste of what that side of things was like. And I always remember thinking, so like actually for the 07, that was in 06, the 07 season, they actually hired me to do it. Cool. So I was full-time alongside Jeremy. I do my Atlantic race, and then I run up to the booth, and that was just my gig. Cool. And no right being there, no business being there. Like, I had friends that went to broadcast journalism school that are still like fetching coffees at TSN, and I'm here on a 170 car. I'm like, this is so unfair. Right.
But you were a race car driver.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. It was just it was a side gig until I got racing, right? Until I got to IndyCar. And then it was always kind of in the back of my head that, because like it's so cliche, right? Athlete retires from sport and goes up in booth. But it was always something I had in the back of my head.
Right. How many F1 races do you do now?
So this year I'm going to be doing 8.
Cool.
Yeah, which is awesome. So if they asked me, I did 3 the first year, I did 6 last year, I'll do 8 this year.
And was that something you pushed to do?
No, they called me, man.
Cool.
Yeah, that was a really cool phone call to get. There was a guy called Ben Edwards that, so because I did this Champ Car international broadcast, that's what would play in Europe. So weirdly, a bunch of people in Europe knew me as the Champ Car commentator guy.
Right, yeah.
And so in 2009, Bernie Ecclestone was trying this new thing with Formula One where they were playing races in movie theaters.
Okay.
So you pay like $20 and you go get to watch it on the big screen rather than watch it at home. Kind of cool concept.
Yeah.
But it was its own program, and so they had their own commentating team, and they had this guy called Ben Edwards was the play-by-play, and they would kind of bring in different color commentators or analysts or whatever. So for the race in Montreal, Ben was like, oh, yeah, well, I've heard this guy on Champ Car stuff. You're Canadian. Why don't you come do this? It's like, cool. So I technically called an F1 race for this F1 in the movie theater company in 2009. And then during A1GP, Ben Edwards was the lead commentator. A1 ran for 4 years. Team Canada folded after the 3rd year. So when there was no Team Canada, and again, you had to be from the country to drive in the series.
Right.
So once Team Canada folded, I couldn't drive in it.
Right.
So the production company asked me if I wanted to do some pit lane stuff because they had heard me do the Champ Car broadcast when I was 19.
Right.
And so I worked with Ben there. So anyway, so Ben sends me a text one day. He's like, hey, man, we're looking for someone to do some work with F1 TV. Would you have any interest? Yeah, of course. So then connected me with those guys, and it kind of went from there.
Cool.
All goes back to Jeremy Shaw and the little porta-pack in the side of the TV production trailer in 2006.
Yeah, not realizing the effect because it's shipped out to the rest of the world, not here.
Not a single person in North America ever heard it.
Huh.
No idea I was even doing it.
Huh.
But everyone in Europe was like, oh, yeah, I remember you from the...
You're the commentator.
You're the commentator guy.
Huh. Do you enjoy those more or less different than IndyCar?
Very different.
Yeah.
It's when so the IndyCar program when you work for NBC and I'm new to the TV business, so I'm still learning this stuff, but I have learned that globally American network television sports broadcasts are held as like the gold standard of live television. Okay. I didn't know that, but that's it because you look at like Sunday NFL Sunday Ticket, like all the comment, all the pundits, all the sets, there's the level of money and professionalism. Like globally in the television world, American network television sports broadcasts are like it. Right. So when I go to the F1 TV stuff, it's a streaming service, right? They have no rules compared to network television. Right. Network TV, you're dealing with, first of all, there's no commercials, right? So network TV, everything's playing to the second because you have to have this many commercials. They're this long. You know exactly how many. You've got to fit them in wherever. Every segment is going to be this long. You have this long to talk. Like it's a lot more structured. We don't like script stuff necessarily, but in an open, Lee will be like, all right, I'm going to open with this comment. You've got 15 seconds to talk about this topic. We agree that you're going to cover this one. You have about 15 seconds for that. We're going to throw to this guy, whatever. Got it. F1 TV, it's more like we're on. We need to cover these basic things in the time that we've got. But like if it takes us 30 minutes, cool. If it takes us 38 minutes, also cool. There's no breaks. So it's like the commercial breaks in IndyCar are so nice because we can take the headsets off. Lee Townsend and I can talk. We can talk to the pit lane guys. We can kind of like, we can gossip a little bit about what's happening. We can like try to predict what we think. Oh, I think this guy's doing that. Oh no, there's a little bit of back and forth. Right. And then we can put the headsets back on and, talk. In this one, you're just talking for the whole time. Oh, she's live. The whole thing's live. So you don't kind of get that interaction with the others, which is a little bit different. But yeah, it's just, they're just so different in how they run. There's pros and cons to both, and so it's been really fun for me as a guy new to TV to kind of experience a bit of both of it. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. That's cool. I'm such a fan of the MX-5, the Mazda stuff, and I saw that you're running at the Glen. Yeah. How was that? The best. It's the best racing on earth, man. It's so much fun. It is so much fun. Have you ever driven one? No.
No, I want to.
You've got to do a race, man. Okay. You've got to do a race. It's because it's like the car is easy to drive, right? The car is very simple.
Sure.
Which is what's so good about it, right? So anyone can jump in and be competitive. What's tricky there is the racecraft. Because it's like Talladega, but with right turns.
Right.
Like every track is a drafting track.
Right.
Right. When they're going to like Road America, Watkins Glen, Road Atlanta, like VIR, even like Mid Ohio, Laguna Seca, like those are the two that maybe you could break away from the group if you're really good.
Right.
But even then, probably not. Like, I did Watkins. The car's very easy to drive within like a second of the limit, right?
Okay.
Of the ultimate limit. And if you're within a second, dude, you're in the pack.
Right.
Like, you're in the race.
Okay.
And so then it's all just like the racecraft behind it. And that's where I just got absolutely buried. Because like I had no idea. I had watched some video and stuff, but like these guys have been doing, when to pull out, who to trust, how to do this, how to do that. It was such a fun experience. But yeah, I'm with you. You've got to try it. It's the best series.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember, I think I was watching the one from the year before, and then I saw you were doing it. I'm like, wow, he's going to be fast, but I don't know how I'll do. Like, this is insane.
I was totally expecting to just get like dumped or like, when it was like that move at the end, like no one's going to come with me, right? Like, I don't want this guy to do well. Like I get it.
Yeah.
But no, I would love to try it again. Like that first weekend, you learn so much, right? So
Right.
you'd be just at such a better starting point if you did it again. But Parker Kligerman had done it the year before. He was like the guest guy that came in. And I'm buddies with Parker. So I was like, hey man, how was that? He goes, dude, you've got to do it.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, I'm in.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. I was asking, I've been playing around with this question for race car guys. If you could take any series and elevate it to the level of F1, like regardless whether it's like dirt go-karts, what would it be?
Aussie V8s.
Okay.
V8 Supercars is like one of the coolest championships out there. The car is so much fun to drive.
You and Rossi did it? No.
Yeah. Rossi and I did Bathurst 1000 in 2019. And then I had done they used to do they call it like the international race at Surfers Paradise, where you had the race driver, but then the co-driver had to be like a non-Aussie V8 guy, had to be some international guy.
Okay.
So a lot of IndyCar guys did it, some like DTM guys did it, stuff like that. We got to do that one year as well. The cars are just so much fun. They're so tricky to drive. They're very unique. Like to get the ultimate lap time out of it, it's a really specific driving style. But they're raw, they're tons of power, not a lot of tire. They've got enough technology in them to make them a cool car, but they're not like a GTP car that like 47 switches and mode this, strat that. So like, I just think, and like the racing is so good because you're just door to door, bumper to bumper. Like I think that would be a really cool championship to get like proper global recognition.
Yeah, I need to watch more of that.
Yeah, it's good, man.
We got to touch on the PFAFF deal before you go.
Of course.
How did Daytona go?
I mean, good and bad, bittersweet, right? Such a big undertaking for the team to take on a new manufacturer, and they got the car pretty late. Like everything was it's not that it was behind. We knew the schedule, but it was just a late schedule. So while everyone's down testing at Daytona in December, the car's literally just showing up at the shop for the first time. So these guys had to rip it apart, go through everything. You're fabricating pieces that you need. There's so much work to do on these cars before the 24. So they had to do that in a very short period of time. And then we've never run the thing.
Right.
First time the car hit the track was Friday of the Roar.
Which is always so tough.
So tough.
Yeah.
So setups, no idea. We're just going off baseline stuff from the manufacturer. Marvin Kirchhofer is one of the full-time guys there. He's a factory McLaren guy. He was a huge resource just to like help understand, hey, is this normal? Hey, is this how it should feel? What is this? What is that, right? So all things considered, the pace was pretty good, and the team did an unbelievable job, like dealing with a lot of curveballs thrown at us. Never mind all the work they did to get there, but on the weekend of the Roar and the weekend of the race, like dealt with a lot of stuff and dealt with it really well.
Yeah, sorting a car.
So it was a bummer that we didn't have the reliability because the pace was there and the team did a great job, but it wasn't super unexpected. But I think there's a lot of potential there for sure.
Right. Are you in that car for the season?
I'm in for the 3 Enduros. So Rolex, Sebring, and Petit.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not mad at it.
Yeah. No doubt. Man, that's cool.
Yeah. I mean, I've always wanted to drive with those guys, right? Like when I stepped back from IndyCar, I wanted to get into IMSA, but I always wanted to do it with them. And we tried in 22. It kind of didn't work out. We tried in 23. We were close, and then it didn't work out. And I'd kind of accepted that like maybe this was going to be tougher to pull off than I thought. And like for the first time, actually started looking at other teams because I hadn't really done that.
Right. And you had a desire to go do those races.
Yeah. So I had a desire to do it, and I'd want to do it right away, but I really wanted to do it with FAFF. So it was kind of FAFF or bust for 2 years, and it was bust. So I was like, all right, I guess if I want to do this, and like I've sat now for 2 years, like I'm going to do it, I should do it. So I started making other calls, and then that's when everything started rolling, and it all came together as, third time's a charm, I guess.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Before I let you go, ask everyone to give a piece of advice, and you've obviously scratched and clawed and succeeded and done it. What advice do you have for young, because there's a unique perspective here, young Canadian guys trying to make a living as a race car driver?
It's funny you word it that way, because that's one of the biggest pieces of advice that I give. I'm a partner in a management company. We help young drivers and their families kind of exactly what my dad and I needed when I was a kid. We've created a company to do that for families. And one of the very first questions I ask them is, so let's say they are on an open wheel path. I'll say, well, do you want to be an IndyCar driver or do you want to be a racing driver? Do you want to be a Formula One driver or do you want to be a racing driver? Do you want to be a stock car driver or do you want to be a racing driver? Because those are two very different things.
Right.
And that affects a lot how you position yourself and what decisions you make. And so, yeah, I mean, a piece of advice is decide what you want to be early, whether it's an IndyCar driver or a racing driver.
Right.
And then it's so cliche, man. It sounds, I hate even saying these words. It's don't give up.
Right.
Because this business is so tough that it weeds out the ones that don't want it bad enough very quickly. They're the ones that can afford to do it for a long time and don't have to want it.
Right.
Fine. That's just the nature. If you don't like that, buy a tennis racket. Like, you're in the wrong sport.
Yeah.
But if that's not the position you're in, the ones that keep clawing and don't get knocked down every time they get knocked, don't stay down every time they get knocked down, eventually people see that, and eventually that one opportunity comes up. You got to be ready, and you got to capitalize when it happens. Right? You're not going to get two necessarily, but if you just don't quit, always put yourself in front of people, always be there, always be on someone's mind, then that opportunity one day is going to come, because everyone else is going to give up, and they're going to come to you, and then you have to be prepared in that moment.
Oh, that's good. Thanks for coming on, man.
Of course, buddy. Thanks for having me.
That was good.
Yeah, good fun.
If you guys enjoyed this podcast, share it with some friends. Hit subscribe on the YouTube. Hit subscribe on Spotify and Apple. See you guys next week.